Hi, this is Lynn Chase, and welcome to this week's Business Organizations Lecture. Our topic this week is corporate management, which is also known as corporate governance. This week's lecture supports the overall learning objective, which is creating a Colorado for-profit corporation. The concepts discussed in this lecture are reinforced by the weekly video and your collaborative in-class activities.
By the end of this lesson, you will understand corporate management or governance structures used by corporations and be able to create a strategy to manage your new corporation and include that strategy in the development of the articles of incorporation. For-profit corporations are governed by shareholders who elect a board of directors that employ corporate officers to carry out the mission of the corporation. You will notice that shareholders elect and can remove members of the board of directors, but the board is ultimately responsible for overseeing the operations of the corporation and setting policy and hiring and firing officers. The officers carry out the directives of the board of directors. Nonprofit corporations have a very similar structure, except there are no owners or shareholders. In the place of shareholders are members of the not-for-profit organization who elect directors. As owners of the corporation, shareholders have certain rights and responsibilities. The major responsibility is to vote upon the election of the board of directors. In order to properly carry out their responsibilities, stockholders have the right to receive copies of the annual report and audit findings. They have the right to receive and review minute books of all corporate meetings. The shareholders also have the right to proceed against the corporation for any criminal or civil wrongdoings. Shareholders have the right to receive dividends and other financial benefits from the corporation. Shareholder voting rights can be designed in several different ways. As you develop your corporation, some of the considerations are whether to grant straight voting or cumulative voting by the stockholders. As you can see, straight voting allows each shareholder the right to one vote for each share of stock, while cumulative voting allows each stock one vote for each position being voted upon. For example, if a shareholder had only one share of stock, they would only have one vote. However, if shareholders are given cumulative voting rights and there were 5 open positions on the board of directors, they would each have 5 votes. As you can see, the more shares you own, the more likely it is you'll be elected to the board of directors. The typical titles of the members of the board of directors are chairman or chairwoman of the board, vice chairman or chairwoman of the board, secretary, and treasurer. Other members are simply called members of the board. The board of directors manage the corporation. Boards of directors have many roles and responsibilities. Please review some of these. The officers hired by the board of directors may have some of the following titles: President or Chief Executive Officer, also known as CEO, Vice President, Secretary, and Treasurer are other typical officers of the corporation. In a small corporation, many of these positions may be held by members of the board of directors. But in large corporations, these positions are appointed or hired by the board of directors and answer to them. Other officers you may encounter are the Chief Operating Officer, also known as the COO, and the Chief Financial Officer, or the CFO. Here you see an organizational chart of a marketing company and the many different officers and their titles. There's no required or standard organizational chart, and each corporation will design their operation to meet the current needs of the company. This organizational chart is a typical not-for-profit hospital corporation. You will notice that rather than stockholders, we have members who set the policy and employ the corporation's officers. One of the main advantages of the corporate structure is the shield, which is created to protect the owners from personal liability. This shield is often called the corporate veil because it screens out potential liability for the owners from all claims against the corporation. However, this protection can be lost through the process often known as piercing the corporate veil. Accomplishing piercing the corporate veil is much more common for small, closely held corporations because the owners often disregard best practices of corporate management. When officers or directors commingle monies from the company with their personal assets or fail to follow organizational guidelines, creditors of the company may be able to reach the personal assets of the shareholders. Piercing the corporate veil often occurs when the owners fail to treat the corporation as a separate legal entity, but assume that they are personally one and the same. This condition is often referred to as the owners treating the corporation as their alter ego. Criminal or reckless conduct by a few corporations have resulted in high-profile scandals. Many people speculate as to the reasons why corporate irresponsibility happens, but a few causes simply come down to greed and lack of appropriate management controls. As a result of the banking collapse of 2008, several companies received a bailout from the federal government. These companies were required by the provisions of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009 to limit some of the excessive compensation paid. Please review some of the limitations imposed upon directors and officers by this act. In summarizing this lesson, please pay special attention to the concept that shareholders own the company but do not manage the company directly. Corporations consist of three separate groups: shareholders, directors, and officers. Shareholders may vote in person or by proxy. They may initiate actions against the company and can enter into agreements with other shareholders to vote or affect the operation of the corporation. Shareholders ordinarily do not have personal liability for acts of the corporation, but may become personally liable if they disregard proper corporate governance. Directors manage the corporation and can avoid formal meetings if all directors and shareholders enter into written consent agreements. Corporate directors have fiduciary duties to the corporation, but so long as they are following reasonable business purposes and abiding by the business judgment rules, they will be protected from personal liability.
Thanks for watching this week's Business Organizations video lecture. After reflecting on your textbook content and this lecture, please proceed to the Corporate Management Quiz, which will help you to reinforce your recent learning.